The grand ballroom at Oakhaven Country Club buzzed, a symphony of clinking glasses and forced laughter. It was supposed to be Vicky's day, a perfect picture of happiness. But as the last strains of the string quartet faded, Vicky stepped up to the microphone, her smile a little too bright, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. That's when it happened. Her voice, clear and sharp, cut through the celebratory din. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, a chilling preamble. "Everyone except my mother. She's always just been a disruption in my life." A collective gasp rippled through the room. My stomach plummeted, but I held my ground, a mask of polite composure firmly in place. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken judgment. Vicky continued, her words a carefully crafted dagger, detailing perceived slights and past grievances, painting me as the villain of her narrative. I felt the eyes of every guest on me, a sea of pity and curiosity. With a final, dismissive glance, she turned away, leaving me stranded in the wreckage of her public pronouncement. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My throat felt tight, my heart a lead weight. I managed a tight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the end of an era, and began my quiet retreat. The walk felt miles long, each step a deliberate act of self-control. I navigated the throng, avoiding the sympathetic or accusatory gazes. Outside, the cool evening air offered little solace. The opulent facade of Oakhaven seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I got into my car, the familiar leather seats suddenly feeling alien. The drive home was a blur of flashing streetlights and the echoing sound of Vicky's words. The life I'd meticulously built, the sacrifices I'd made, all dismissed with such casual cruelty. I felt hollowed out, a shell of the woman I'd been just moments before. The silence in Eleanor's suburban home was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the ballroom. The key turned in the lock with a click that sounded way too loud in the sudden quiet. My house, Eleanor's suburban home, usually a sanctuary, felt like a tomb. The faint scent of lilies from the wedding still clung to the air, a mocking reminder of the forced smiles and hollow congratulations. I kicked off my heels, the relief of shedding them almost a physical pain. My feet throbbed, not just from the hours spent standing, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. Vicky's words, disruption, echoed in the cavernous silence. Disruption. Was that all I was? After everything? I walked into the kitchen, the overhead light blindingly bright. No one was here. Maggie wouldn't come until tomorrow, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was ready for her pitying gaze. I needed to do this alone, to channel the raw, jagged edges of my hurt into something concrete. Something that would make Vicky understand. Not just understand, but it. My laptop sat on the granite countertop, an innocent portal to a world I was about to dismantle. My fingers, surprisingly steady, flew across the keyboard. First the honeymoon. A week in Maui, booked months ago. A romantic getaway for the happy couple. I navigated to the travel agency's website, my eyes scanning the confirmation details. With a few clicks it was gone. Cancelled. A non-refundable deposit. A small price to pay for a moment of control. I didn't even hesitate. The confirmation email landed in my inbox, a digital death knell. Next, the apartment. The chic downtown loft Vicky and Robert had leased, a symbol of their fresh start, their independence from me. It was all set up, furniture delivered, utilities connected. I pulled up the lease agreement, the legally binding document I'd helped them secure. A quick call to the leasing office, my voice a low, steady monotone. Yes, a sudden change of plans. Family emergency. The lease termination clause was clear. A hefty penalty, of course, but again a necessary cost. They'd be out on their ear. No cozy nest for the newlyweds. Then the finances. The joint accounts, the credit cards I'd added for emergencies, the car insurance. It was all tied together, a financial safety net I'd woven with care. Now it was time to snip the threads. I logged into my online banking, the familiar interface feeling foreign like a battlefield. I initiated transfers, closed accounts, cancelled cards. Each transaction was a small, deliberate act of severance. It felt cold, calculated, and utterly necessary, like a surgeon excising a tumor. I pictured Vicky's face, the smug entitlement, the casual cruelty. And I felt nothing. Just a grim satisfaction, a sense of purpose returning to the void. I moved through the house like a ghost, each room a repository of memories I was systematically erasing. The wedding album, still on the coffee table, mockingly displayed a younger, happier Vicky, her arm around my shoulders. I couldn't bear to look. I needed to focus on the present, on the task at hand. I picked up my phone, scrolling through contacts. Not Vicky's number. Not yet. I found Arthur Finch's. His firm handled all my legal matters. He'd understand. He always did. My thumb hovered over the call button. The line connected, and his calm, professional voice answered. Arthur, it's Eleanor. I took a deep breath, the scent of lilies replaced by the sterile air of my own home. I need to make some changes. Significant changes. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had threatened to betray me earlier. Yes, immediately. I didn't elaborate. He didn't need me to. He knew me. He knew the quiet strength that lay beneath the surface. He knew that when Eleanor Vance decided to act, she did so with absolute precision. The planning had begun. The real work, the heavy part as I'd come to understand it, was just getting started. The night was still young, and my focus was unwavering. The silence in Eleanor's suburban home was supposed to be a relief, but it was a thin, fragile thing. It had barely settled before the phone shrieked, ripping through the quiet like a siren. 3 o'clock in the morning. Who the hell calls at 3 in the morning unless it's an emergency? My heart leaped into my throat, a jolt of pure adrenaline. I fumbled for my phone on the kitchen counter. The screen's glare harsh in the dark. The caller ID flashed Vicky. Course. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. The conversation with Arthur had given me a sliver of control, a sense of purpose. But this felt different. This was raw. I answered, my voice a little rough. Hello, Mom. Vicky's voice was a ragged mess, choked with tears and something that sounded like pure, unadulterated panic. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in years, not since she was a little girl, scraped knee and lost teddy bear. But this wasn't a lost teddy bear. This was something else entirely. Vicky, what's wrong? I kept my tone even, a practiced calm I didn't feel. The night air in Eleanor's suburban home seemed to press in on me, heavy with unspoken accusations. What's wrong? She practically screamed, the sound crackling over the line. You know damn well what's wrong. You ruined everything. My wedding, my life, everything. Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. Vicky, what are you talking about? Asked, my voice still measured. I could hear the faint sounds of a party in the background. Muffled music, distant laughter. They were still celebrating even now. Don't play dumb with me, Mom. The flights are cancelled. The apartment lease is cancelled. My credit cards are all shut down. What the hell did you do? Her voice was rising, shrill and desperate. Robert is freaking out. We have nowhere to go, no money. This is all your fault. My fault. The familiar refrain. The weight of it, the injustice, settled in my chest. But it was different now. It wasn't just hurt. It was a cold, hard certainty. I did what I had to do, Vicky, I said, my voice low and steady. The words felt like stones in my mouth. You had to do what? You had to destroy my life. My marriage. Tears were streaming down her face. I could practically hear them. You're a monster. You always have been. You just couldn't stand to see me happy, could you? You had to be the center of attention, even on my wedding day. The accusations were a torrent, a desperate lashing out. It was the same old script, just amplified, twisted into something ugly and venomous. I let her vent, letting the words wash over me. I imagined her pacing the floor of some fancy hotel suite, Robert probably standing there, fuming. His own carefully constructed world starting to crumble. But You think this is about attention? I finally interrupted, my voice cutting through her tirade. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made her pause. You think this is about me? You stood up in front of everyone we know, and you threw me away. You called me a disruption. A disruption, Vicky. I let the word hang in the air between us, heavy with the memory of the ballroom, the stunned faces, the humiliation. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered, her voice losing some of its fire, replaced by a shaky uncertainty. It was the stress, the cameras. No, Vicky. You meant it exactly like that. And I'm just cleaning up the mess. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. There was a chilling calm in my tone, a quiet finality that seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting could have. I could feel the foundations of her world shaking, the carefully built facade starting to crack. Mom, please, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. Please, what do we do? Albert, he's saying he's done. Done. Just like that. The strategic alliance, already showing its cracks. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a cold, detached observation. That's your problem to solve, Vicky, I said, my voice flat. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. There was a choked sob on the other end of the line, then silence. Heavy, broken silence. I waited for a moment, then, without another word, I hung up. The phone felt cold in my hand. The adrenaline had receded, leaving behind a hollow ache, but also a strange, unsettling peace. The storm outside had passed, but the real tempest was just beginning. The silence in Eleanor's suburban home had barely settled before the phone shrieked, ripping through the quiet like a siren. 3 o'clock in the morning. Who the hell calls at 3 in the morning unless it's an emergency? My heart leaped into my throat, a jolt of pure adrenaline. I fumbled for my phone on the kitchen counter. The screen's glare harsh in the dark. The caller ID flashed Vicky. Course. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. The conversation with Arthur had given me a sliver of control, a sense of purpose. But this felt different. This was raw. I answered, my voice a little rough. Hello, Mom. Vicky's voice was a ragged mess, choked with tears and something that sounded like pure, unadulterated panic. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in years, not since she was a little girl, scraped knee and lost teddy bear. But this wasn't a lost teddy bear. This was something else entirely. Vicky, what's wrong? I kept my tone even, a practiced calm I didn't feel. The night air in Eleanor's suburban home seemed to press in on me, heavy with unspoken accusations. What's wrong? She practically screamed, the sound crackling over the line. You know damn well what's wrong. You ruined everything. My wedding, my life, everything. Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. Vicky, what are you talking about? Asked, my voice still measured. I could hear the faint sounds of a party in the background. Muffled music, distant laughter. They were still celebrating even now. Don't play dumb with me, Mom. The flights are cancelled. The apartment lease is cancelled. My credit cards are all shut down. What the hell did you do? Her voice was rising, shrill and desperate. Robert is freaking out. We have nowhere to go, no money. This is all your fault. My fault. The familiar refrain. The weight of it, the injustice, settled in my chest. But it was different now. It wasn't just hurt. It was a cold, hard certainty. I did what I had to do, Vicky, I said, my voice low and steady. The words felt like stones in my mouth. You had to do what? You had to destroy my life. My marriage. Tears were streaming down her face. I could practically hear them. You're a monster. You always have been. You just couldn't stand to see me happy, could you? You had to be the center of attention, even on my wedding day. The accusations were a torrent, a desperate lashing out. It was the same old script, just amplified, twisted into something ugly and venomous. I let her vent, letting the words wash over me. I imagined her pacing the floor of some fancy hotel suite, Robert probably standing there, fuming, his own carefully constructed world starting to crumble. But you think this is about attention? I finally interrupted, my voice cutting through her tirade. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made her pause. You think this is about me? You stood up in front of everyone we know, and you threw me away. You called me a disruption. A disruption, Vicky. I let the word hang in the air between us, heavy with the memory of the ballroom, the stunned faces, the humiliation. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered, her voice losing some of its fire, replaced by a shaky uncertainty. It was the stress, the cameras. No, Vicky. You meant it exactly like that. And I'm just cleaning up the mess. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. There was a chilling calm in my tone, a quiet finality that seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting could have. I could feel the foundations of her world shaking, the carefully built facade starting to crack. Mom, please, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. Please, what do we do? Albert, he's saying he's done. Done. Just like that. The strategic alliance, already showing its cracks. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a cold, detached observation. That's your problem to solve, Vicky, I said, my voice flat. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. There was a choked sob on the other end of the line, then silence. Heavy, broken silence. I waited for a moment, then, without another word, I hung up. The phone felt cold in my hand. The adrenaline had receded, leaving behind a hollow ache, but also a strange, unsettling peace. The storm outside had passed, but the real tempest was just beginning. The next morning, the sun felt like an accusation. I dressed in a simple, dark suit, the kind that meant business. No frills, no softness, just purpose. My destination was Sterling and Finch law offices, a sleek glass tower downtown that screamed power and money. It was a different world from my quiet suburban street, but it was where the real work would happen. I'd called Arthur Finch the night before, after hanging up on Vicky. He'd agreed to see me first thing, no questions asked. He'd handled my finances, my estate, all of it for years. He knew my quiet nature, but he also knew my backbone. The lobby was all polished marble and hushed tones. A receptionist with a perfectly coiffed bob directed me to the executive elevator. As I ascended, I clutched my handbag, the familiar weight of it a small comfort. Inside Arthur's office, the view of the city spread out before us, a sprawling concrete jungle. Arthur, a man whose calm demeanor always put me at ease, offered me a seat. He was older, his hair silvered at the temples, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Eleanor, he greeted, his voice a low rumble. You sounded urgent last night. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Arthur, I need your help. I need you to execute a plan. Comprehensive plan. I laid out the events of the wedding, the humiliation, Vicky's words. I didn't cry. I didn't falter. I just stated the facts, the cold, hard truth of it all. She called me, I added, my voice flat. She's in a panic. Robert's panicking. They have nothing. Arthur listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Eleanor, what you've done. Drastic. It's necessary, I corrected, my gaze unwavering. She made her choices. She chose her path. Now I'm helping her navigate the consequences. I then laid out the next steps, the carefully constructed dominoes I intended to push. The legal documents I'd gathered, the financial maneuvers I'd initiated, all of it. I spoke of Robert, of his ambition, of the cracks I knew existed beneath his polished exterior. Arthur took notes, his pen scratching rhythmically against the paper. He asked precise questions, his legal mind dissecting my plan, identifying potential pitfalls, and offering solutions. The prenuptial agreement, I said, my voice low. I want it enforced to the letter. Every clause. Arthur met my eyes. That will be significant, Eleanor. For Robert. Good, I replied, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. And the offshore accounts. The ones he thought were so cleverly hidden. A slight smile touched Arthur's lips. We've been building a case, Eleanor. You've just given us the ammunition. We spent nearly 2 hours in his office. By the time I left, the plan was set. The wheels were in motion. It felt less like revenge and more like rebalancing, correcting a grave injustice. As I walked out of the Sterling and Finch building, the city noise seemed to fade. Felt lighter, cleaner. The heavy part, the part that truly mattered, was just beginning. The drive to Lake Serenity felt like shedding a skin. The city, with its sharp edges and judging eyes, receded in the rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and the promise of quiet. Arthur had given me the directions, a simple address for a place I'd never been, a place he assured me was private, remote. As I pulled up to the small, weathered cabin, nestled amongst tall pines, a sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't the peace of surrender, but the stillness of purpose. This was my war room. Inside it was basic but clean. A worn couch, a sturdy wooden table, a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Perfect. No distractions. Just me and the mountain of work Arthur had helped me assemble. The legal briefs and contracts were stacked high on the table, a testament to years of meticulous planning, both by me and by Arthur's firm. They were my ammunition, my blueprints. For the next few days, time blurred into a rhythm of focused effort. I woke with the sun, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and settled in. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside or the distant call of a bird. It was a stark contrast to the constant hum of my suburban life, the polite smiles, the underlying tension. Here, there was only the crisp rustle of paper, the scratch of my pen, the quiet hum of my own thoughts. I went through every document, every financial statement, every clause in the prenuptial agreement. I reread Vicky's wedding vows, not for comfort, but for the cold, hard facts of what she'd promised, and what she'd so easily discarded. I traced the lines of Robert's business dealings, the intricate web of shell companies and offshore accounts Arthur had started to unravel. Each piece of paper was a step further into the heart of the matter, a confirmation of my instincts. There were moments, of course, when the sheer weight of it all threatened to crush me. Images of Vicky's face, contorted in anger and accusation, flashed behind my eyes. The memory of her words, "You're a monster," echoed in the stillness. But I pushed them away, compartmentalizing the hurt. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about consequence. It was about setting things right, not for them but for myself. I used a burner cell phone, the kind you can buy with cash, to stay in touch with Arthur. He'd send me updates, confirmations, and I'd relay my decisions. We spoke in clipped, businesslike tones. There was no room for sentimentality. He understood. He'd seen enough in his career to know that some wounds ran too deep to be ignored. One afternoon, I found myself holding Eleanor's pearl necklace, a gift from my own mother, tucked away in a small velvet pouch. I hadn't worn it in years, not since my own wedding day. I ran my thumb over the smooth, cool pearls, each one a memory, a piece of my history. Felt heavy, significant. I put it back in the pouch. It was a reminder of where I came from, of the values I'd tried to instill, values that had been so carelessly trampled. The days passed, marked only by the changing light outside the cabin windows. I was a machine, fueled by a quiet, simmering rage and a deep, unshakable resolve. I was meticulously preparing for the next phase, the part where the carefully constructed edifice of Vicky and Robert's perfect life would begin to crumble, brick by brick. This solitary focus, this intense preparation, was the calm before the real storm. And I was ready. The crunch of tires on gravel outside the cabin broke the quiet. I glanced up from the stack of legal briefs and contracts, a flicker of apprehension in my gut. It was too early for Arthur to be checking in. The door creaked open, and Maggie stood there, silhouetted against the bright morning light, her brow furrowed with worry. "Eleanor. Oh, thank God. I was so worried when I couldn't reach you," she said, stepping inside and letting the door swing shut behind her. She looked around the small space, her eyes taking in the scattered papers, the half-empty coffee mug. "What in the world are you doing out here?" I managed a weak smile, pushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "Just needed some space, Maggie. I'm quiet." She walked over, her gaze soft but searching. "Quiet? Eleanor, you've been out of touch for days. Vicky called me hysterical. I said you'd done something. Something that messed everything up for her and Robert." She paused, her voice dropping. She sounded truly broken, Elle. Like her whole world imploded. I looked down at my hands, tracing the lines etched into my palms. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but Maggie's concern, her genuine worry, chipped away at the icy resolve I'd been building. "She's right," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I did do something." Maggie sat down on the worn couch, her posture tense. "What, Elle? What did you do?" I took a deep breath, the air in the cabin suddenly feeling thick and heavy. Remember what she said at the wedding? About me being a disruption. About me ruining her life. The memory still stung, a fresh wound. "She didn't mean it, not really," she said. "Just stress." But she did. She meant every word. But to cut her off like that. To cancel everything. Maggie's voice was laced with disbelief. "Eleanor, that's extreme." "Extreme?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. What was extreme was her standing up there, in front of everyone, and throwing me away like yesterday's trash. What was extreme was her publicly shaming me, her own mother, for her own ambition. She chose her path, Maggie. She chose Robert and his world over me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back fiercely. I'm cleaning up the mess. The mess she made. She wanted a perfect life, a perfect marriage. Well, sometimes you have to clear the ground to build something new. And sometimes that means tearing down what's already there. Maggie watched me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and concern. "But this feels like more than just cleaning up, Elle. Feels like retribution." I met her gaze, my own eyes hard. "Maybe it is. Maybe I've taken enough. Maybe I'm done being the disruption, the one who's always in the way of their perfect little lives." She wanted to be free of me. Fine. I'm just helping her along. I didn't tell her about Arthur, about the full scope of the legal maneuvers. That was my burden to carry, my carefully constructed strategy. "It's for the best, Maggie," I said, my voice firm, though a tremor ran through it. "For all of us in the long run." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions and the deep, visceral hurt that had driven me to this isolated place. The quiet of the cabin had been a balm, a place to gather my thoughts and my resolve. But even in this sanctuary, the world kept spinning, and the wheels of my plan were already turning, grinding away at the edges of their perfect lives. I'd been back in my own home for a few days, the sterile quiet of the cabin replaced by the familiar hum of my suburban existence. Maggie had left, still looking worried, but I'd assured her I was fine, just needed to regroup. She'd always been the worrier, bless her heart. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I was sorting through mail, mostly junk, when I saw it. A thick envelope, official-looking, with the return address of Sterling and Finch law offices. My breath hitched. Arthur. I hadn't expected anything from him so soon. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, a formal legal notice. It was addressed to Robert Sterling. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, but the key phrases jumped out at me. Prenuptial agreement, invalidity claim, breach of contract. I reread it, my mind racing. Robert. He'd been so confident, so sure that prenup was a piece of paper they could toss aside, a formality he'd easily sidestepped. He and Vicky had probably laughed about it, about how easily they'd navigated the legalities. They'd thought they were so clever. But Arthur, bless his meticulous soul, had found something. Something in that agreement that Robert, in his arrogance, had overlooked. Or perhaps he'd deliberately ignored it, assuming his charm and wealth would smooth over any potential wrinkles. The notice stated that due to certain undisclosed financial entanglements and a failure to meet specific clauses outlined in the agreement prior to the marriage, the validity of the prenuptial agreement was being formally challenged. A slow smile spread across my face. This was it. The first domino. Robert, the smooth operator, the man who'd likely seen Vicky as a strategic acquisition, was about to get a taste of his own medicine. He'd built his empire on calculated moves, on understanding the fine print. Now the fine print was coming for him. I pictured his face when he received this. The confident smirk replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning realization, and finally a cold dread. He wouldn't know what hit him. He'd probably blame Vicky, or worse, try to charm his way out of it, just like he always did. But this wasn't a social snub or a minor business deal. This was the law. And Arthur Finch was a master of the law. I carefully placed the notice back in the envelope, a strange sense of satisfaction washing over me. It wasn't vindictive, not really. It was just justice, correction. Vicky had made her choice, and Robert had been a willing participant in her ambition. They'd built their future on a foundation of lies and manipulation, and now that foundation was starting to crack. I looked at Eleanor's pearl necklace, nestled in its velvet pouch on my dresser. I hadn't touched it since the wedding, but seeing that legal notice, I felt a pull. It was a reminder of the life I'd once envisioned, the values I'd tried to instill. Vicky had discarded those values, and in doing so, she'd discarded a part of me. Robert had enabled it. Now they would both face the consequences. This was just the beginning. The real storm was still gathering. I'd been back home for a few days, trying to settle back into my routine. The cabin had been a good reset, but life, as it always does, had a way of pulling you back in. I was sorting through mail one morning, the usual junk, bills, flyers, nothing exciting, when I spotted that thick envelope. Sterling and Finch. My stomach did a little flip. Arthur Finch, my lawyer. I hadn't expected anything so soon, but I ripped it open anyway. Inside was a formal legal notice, addressed to Robert Sterling. My hands were a little shaky as I read it. It was all legalese, but the gist was clear. They were challenging the validity of the prenup. Apparently, Arthur had found something, a loophole or a forgotten clause, something Robert had overlooked in his smug confidence. I pictured his face when he got it, that smooth, unshakable confidence probably cracking just a little. Felt like a small victory, a first step. Later that day I got a call from Vicky. She sounded not her usual chirpy self, but agitated, almost frantic. "Mom, something's wrong," she blurted out, her voice tight. "I can't get into our joint checking account. Or the savings. It's like they've all been frozen or something." I kept my voice even, my heart thudding a little faster. "Frozen? What do you mean, honey?" "I mean I can't access any of it," she practically shouted, and I could hear the panic rising. "My credit cards aren't working either. It's like I don't have any money. Robert's cards are fine, but mine. It's like I'm cut off. What's going on?" I took a slow breath, leaning against the kitchen counter. This was it. The next piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Are you sure, Vicky? Maybe it's a bank error." "A bank error?" She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Mom, this isn't a typo. This is serious. I tried to pay for my coffee this morning and the card got declined. And then I checked the joint account online. Nothing. Zero. It's like I don't exist financially." I could almost see her pacing back and forth in her fancy new apartment, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. She'd always relied on Robert, on his money, his status. She'd built her entire new life around it. And now that lifeline was gone. "I don't know what to tell you, Vicky," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. It was a practiced calm, built on weeks of planning and a lifetime of holding my tongue. "Maybe you should talk to Robert about it. He'd know what's going on." There was a beat of silence, then a choked sob. "He's not answering his phone. I'm starting to freak out, Mom. This is a nightmare." A nightmare. Yes, it was. But for her, and for Robert. For me, it was just the beginning of setting things right. I didn't tell her about Arthur, about the legal notices, about the careful dismantling that was underway. She'd find out soon enough. The ground beneath her perfectly constructed world was crumbling, and she had no idea why. I felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my chest. This was just the start. The real unraveling was yet to come. The burner phone felt foreign in my hand, a cold, impersonal piece of plastic. It was a tool, nothing more. I picked up a new SIM card at a drugstore, paid cash, no questions asked. The plan was coming together, piece by careful piece, like assembling a complex puzzle in the dark. Vicky was in a panic, just as I'd predicted. Her world was already starting to unravel, and she had no clue who was pulling the strings. Robert, too, was likely blindsided. Arthur Finch was a quiet storm, and he was just getting started. Now it was time to nudge a few more things. David Chin, Vicky's loyal friend, the one who always seemed to be in her orbit, admiring her from a safe distance. He'd been at the wedding, of course, looking a bit lost in the glitz. I remembered him from a few family gatherings before. Always polite, a little shy. He wouldn't suspect a thing. I dialed his number, my heart a steady, controlled rhythm. It rang twice before he answered. Hello. His voice was hesitant, unsure. David. Hi, it's Eleanor Vance. I kept my voice light, friendly, the kind of tone I used when I called about a bake sale or a school play. Oh, Eleanor. Is everything okay? He sounded surprised. Yes, everything's fine, dear. I was just thinking about Vicky. She's been so quiet lately, and I know she's been stressed with the wedding and all. I was hoping maybe you'd heard from her. I've been trying to reach her, but she's not picking up. A little white lie, easy enough. There was a pause. Yeah, I talked to her yesterday. She sounded a little upset. Upset? Dear. Did she say why? I injected a note of genuine concern, a carefully crafted performance. She was talking about some financial stuff. Said her cards weren't working, and she couldn't get into their accounts. She seemed really freaked out. Bingo. The seeds were being sown. Oh, that's terrible, I murmured. I wonder what's going on. Robert's usually so on top of things. I just hope it's nothing serious. You know how much she relies on him for. Well, for everything. I just worry she's not as prepared as she thinks she is for the realities of marriage, especially with someone like Robert. He's very business-minded, isn't he? Sometimes I worry that gets in the way of him seeing the person. I let that hang in the air, a subtle suggestion of Robert's potential coldness, his transactional view of relationships. David was quiet for a moment, processing. I could almost see him picturing Robert, the successful businessman, and Vicky, the beautiful bride. Yeah, Robert's. He's a lot, David finally said, his voice a little lower. Vicky's always said he's got a good head for business, but, I prompted gently. I don't know. He's always seemed a little distant, like he's always got an angle. I hope he's taking care of her, you know? She's my best friend. I know, dear. No. That's why I'm worried too. You're a good friend to her, David. I appreciate that. Keep an eye on her, won't you? And if you hear anything at all. Of course, Eleanor. I will. Thank you, David. You're a sweetheart. I ended the call, a faint smile playing on my lips. The burner phone felt a little less foreign now. It was a conduit, a whisper in the wind, carrying doubt and suspicion. Robert Sterling, the man who thought he was so untouchable, was about to find out that even the most solid foundations could be eroded, one carefully placed doubt at a time. This was just the beginning of the unraveling. The sterile quiet of Arthur Finch's office was a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside me. It had been a few days since I'd spoken to Vicky, and the burner phone sat on my kitchen counter, a constant, cold reminder of the carefully laid groundwork. Arthur had been efficient, almost unnervingly so. He'd taken my initial concerns about Robert's finances and transformed them into a full-blown investigation. Eleanor, Arthur began, his voice measured as he gestured for me to sit. He was a man who dealt in facts, not feelings, and I appreciated that. We've started digging into Sterling's business operations. It's early days, but some interesting patterns are emerging. He slid a file across the polished mahogany desk. It wasn't thick with legal jargon like the prenup notice, but it was dense with numbers and reports. I opened it, my hands steady now, a different kind of calm settling over me. This was the tangible proof, the concrete evidence that would start to chip away at Robert's empire. "What are we looking at?" asked my voice low. "Diversions. Shell companies. Funds that seem to vanish into thin air," Arthur explained, tapping a finger on a particular ledger entry. "He's been very clever, very careful. But there are always traces, especially when you're dealing with assets that rightfully belong elsewhere or perhaps were acquired through less than savory means." My mind flashed back to Robert at the wedding, that smug, self-satisfied smirk. He'd thought he was untouchable, a king in his own little kingdom. He'd underestimated me just like Vicky had. He'd seen me as a relic, a sentimental fool. He didn't realize that sentiment could fuel a fire, a very focused, very destructive fire. "This one company," Arthur continued, pointing to another page, "Sterling Holdings, seems to be the primary vehicle. It's registered offshore, and the transactions are incredibly complex. We're talking about money moving through multiple entities, making it almost impossible to trace without significant forensic accounting. And Arthur is good at forensic accounting, isn't he?" I said, a faint smile touching my lips. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We're following the money, Eleanor. And right now the money trail is leading to some very questionable places. It appears Robert has been engaged in some rather aggressive and potentially illegal business practices for years. Nothing that's been publicly flagged, mind you. He's kept it all very quiet." I leaned back, absorbing the information. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, but one I had orchestrated. Vicky's panic, David's growing unease. It was all part of the symphony. This was the crescendo building, the first real notes of discord in Robert's carefully constructed world. The irregularities Arthur was uncovering were more than just business dealings. They were cracks in the foundation of everything Robert represented, everything he'd used to lure Vicky. He was built on a lie, and I was about to expose it. The thought sent a shiver of grim satisfaction through me. This was just the beginning. The phone rang, jarring me out of my quiet contemplation. It was Vicky. Of course it was Vicky. The timing was almost too perfect, the chaos I'd carefully orchestrated starting to ripple outward, hitting its intended targets. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness of my suburban home settle around me. It felt like a lifetime ago I'd stood in that gilded ballroom, the air thick with forced congratulations and the clinking of champagne glasses. Now, the silence was a different kind of weight, heavy with anticipation. "Mom!" Vicky's voice was tight, strained. She didn't bother with pleasantries, cutting straight to the chase, just like her father. It was a trait I'd always tried to steer her away from, but some things, it seemed, were etched in stone. "Vicky, what is it?" I kept my voice level, betraying none of the satisfaction churning beneath the surface. "What is it? Mom, what did you do?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "The accounts, they're frozen. My credit cards. They're all declined. Robert is going insane. He's saying it's some kind of fraud alert, but it's not. This is you, isn't it?" I let a beat of silence hang in the air, long enough for her accusation to sink in. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, dear," I said, my tone mild, almost innocent. It was a performance, honed over years of dealing with her tantrums, her demands. This was just a bigger stage, a more significant audience. "Don't play dumb with me, Mom. This is exactly what you do. You can't stand to see me happy, can you? You had to ruin it just like always." Her voice rose, laced with a venom that still managed to sting, even after all these years. The hurt was still there, a raw, open wound, but it was also the fuel. "Vicky, you're upset. It's understandable. This must be a shock. I offered no comfort, no reassurance. Just a cold, hard acknowledgement of her distress. Perhaps you should talk to Robert about it. He's your husband now. He'll know how to handle these things. Robert's trying. He's on the phone with banks, with lawyers. But it's not just the money, Mom. It's everything. Feels like my whole life is just falling apart. Tears were evident in her voice now, the facade of control crumbling. Is it? I asked, my voice dropping slightly, a subtle shift in tone that hinted at something more. That's unfortunate. I always thought you were so prepared, Vicky. So capable. The implication was clear, she wasn't. She was reliant, fragile, and her carefully constructed world was built on a foundation of sand. Prepared for what? For my own mother to sabotage me. What do you want, Mom? What do you want from me? The desperation in her voice was almost palpable. She was reaching out, grasping for an explanation, for a lifeline, and I was dangling a noose. I want you to understand, I said, the words measured, each one carefully placed. I want you to understand what it feels like to have everything you've ever cared about taken away. To be dismissed. To be ignored. But I haven't ignored you. I've tried to dash. No, Vicky, I cut her off, my voice firm. You haven't. Not really. You've always been too busy with your own life, your own ambitions. You never saw me. Not the real me. There was a heavy silence on her end. I could picture her, pacing her new, opulent apartment, the wedding ring on her finger feeling like a brand. The pieces were falling into place, the dominoes I'd so carefully set up now toppling one by one. This is insane, Mom. You're insane. She spat the words out, a last-ditch effort to regain control, to dismiss me as the madwoman. Perhaps, I conceded, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. But I'm a sane woman with a plan, Vicky. And you, my dear, are about to learn the difference. I ended the call before she could respond, the click of the receiver a punctuation mark on her unraveling. The burner phone felt heavy in my hand, a tool that had served its purpose for this particular skirmish. The real battle, however, was far from over. The quiet dignity I'd maintained at the wedding was a mask, and the face beneath it was a force of nature, unleashed and unyielding. The air in the City Hall Records Department was thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. It wasn't exactly a glamorous place, but for me it was the command center. Arthur had promised me something big, something that would cut through all of Robert's slick maneuvering, and this was where it was happening. I sat in a worn plastic chair, trying to keep my impatience in check. Every tick of the cheap wall clock felt like another nail in Robert's coffin. Maggie had called earlier, her voice laced with concern, asking if I was sure about all this. Sure, I'd said. Maggie, I'm more sure than I've ever been about anything. The hurt from Vicky's wedding speech was still a raw nerve, but it was also the engine driving this whole operation. Arthur emerged from a back office, a manila folder clutched in his hand. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He just walked over, his expression unreadable, and sat beside me. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and steady. We've got it. He slid the folder onto the table between us. It wasn't just a few pages. It was a stack bound together with a thick rubber band. This was the kind of stuff Robert thought he'd buried so deep nobody would ever find it. What are we looking at, Arthur? I asked, my hands already reaching for the folder. My fingers felt a little shaky, but it was anticipation, not fear. Deeds. Property transfers. Backdated documents, Eleanor. Very backdated. He opened the folder, pointing to a faded official seal. This is proof that Sterling Holdings, the company I mentioned, was used to acquire several key assets years ago. Assets that were, at the time, tied up in complex legal disputes. Disputes that Robert seems to have solved rather conveniently. I scanned the documents, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes, but the core of it was clear. Robert had been playing dirty for a long, long time. He'd built his empire on shaky ground, using shell companies and shady deals to get ahead. The wedding, the opulent life he'd given Vicky, It was all funded by this foundation of lies. This one property, Arthur continued, tapping a document, a commercial building downtown. It was purchased through Sterling Holdings, but the original owner claimed he was coerced. There was a lawsuit filed, then abruptly dropped. And the paperwork here. It shows a significant portion of the purchase price being funneled through a series of offshore accounts that trace back to shell corporations controlled by Robert himself. My mind flashed back to Robert at the wedding, that smug look on his face as he toasted his new bride. He'd seemed so untouchable, so successful. He'd probably thought he'd covered all his tracks. He'd underestimated me just like Vicky had. They both saw me as some old relic, someone to be politely ignored. They didn't realize that being ignored could give you the perfect vantage point to see everything. And this isn't just a one-off, is it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Arthur shook his head. No. We've found similar patterns with other investments. It looks like Robert's entire business model for the last decade has been built on acquiring assets through questionable means, using offshore entities to mask the transactions and avoid taxes. He's been very careful, very deliberate. Deliberate, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. It was the same word I'd used to describe my own actions, though my motives were rooted in something far deeper than greed. It was about justice. It was about making him pay for what he'd done to my daughter, for what he'd done to my family. These documents, Arthur said, gathering the pages carefully. They're solid. They'll hold up in court. We can start the process of freezing some of these assets immediately. It'll be a massive blow to his financial empire. A quiet thrill, cold and sharp, ran through me. This was it. This was the tangible proof. The undeniable evidence that would shatter Robert's carefully crafted image. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing the rot at the core of his success. It was about showing Vicky the truth, even if she wouldn't see it yet. The City Hall Records Department, with its dusty files and bureaucratic procedures, was the place where Robert Sterling's reign was about to end. The pieces were all falling into place, and the picture they formed was far uglier than anyone imagined. The news hit like a ton of bricks. It wasn't some quiet whisper in a back room. It was front-page material, splashed across every major news outlet in Metropolis. Arthur had done his job, and he'd done it with brutal efficiency. The City Hall Records Department, that dusty, forgotten place, had coughed up the truth, and now it was out there for everyone to see. I was at Eleanor's suburban home, Maplewood Drive, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The television was on, a low murmur in the background, but my focus was on my phone. Maggie had called, her voice a mix of shock and grim satisfaction. "Eleanor, did you see this? It's all over the news. Robert Sterling. They're saying he built his whole empire on fraud." I didn't need to see it. He knew. The documents Arthur had unearthed were damning. They painted a picture of a man who had systematically cheated, coerced, and lied his way to the top. Properties acquired through shady deals, money funneled through shell corporations in places no one ever heard of, lawsuits conveniently dropped. It was all there, laid bare for the world. The scandal was immediate and explosive. Sterling Holdings, the very foundation of Robert's wealth and the supposed guarantor of Vicky's perfect life, was under investigation. Stock prices plummeted. Business partners started distancing themselves, their carefully cultivated alliances dissolving like sugar in hot water. The wedding, which had been supposed to be the grand entrance into high society for Vicky and Robert, was now a symbol of his rotten core. I imagined Vicky's reaction. She'd be furious, of course, but beneath the rage, I knew there would be a dawning horror. Her perfect husband, the man who had promised her everything, was a crook. Her entire world, the one she'd so eagerly embraced, was built on lies. It was the same feeling I'd had when I first realized the depth of Robert's deception, the same sickening lurch in my stomach. Maggie continued. "They're talking about indictments, Eleanor. This could ruin him." "Vicky." "Oh, Eleanor, what about Vicky?" I took a slow sip of the cold tea. "Vicky will be fine, Maggie. She's stronger than she thinks. And she'll learn." "Learn what?" Learn that the world isn't always as shiny and perfect as it appears. Learn that people aren't always who they seem. Hope so. The news reports were relentless. Pundits dissected the financial documents, legal experts weighed in, and the public devoured every detail. Robert Sterling, the golden boy, the self-made millionaire, was being painted as a con artist. His carefully constructed image was shattering piece by piece. The wedding photos, once a symbol of a bright future, now looked like a scene from a cautionary tale. I thought about David. He was a good kid, caught up in this mess through no fault of his own. I hoped he'd be okay, that he wouldn't get dragged down by Robert's downfall. He'd been at the wedding, a friendly face in the crowd, unaware of the rot beneath the surface. The impact on Vicky would be immense. Her social standing, her financial security, everything she valued was tied to Robert. This scandal wouldn't just affect him. It would tarnish her too. People would whisper. They'd look at her differently. The life she'd so desperately wanted was already starting to crumble, and it was only chapter 13. I picked up the wedding ring, which I'd kept in a small velvet pouch. It felt heavy, cold, a symbol of a union built on deceit. I hadn't worn it since that night, and I never would again. The weight of it in my hand was a reminder of the weight of the truth that was now out in the open. Robert's carefully constructed world was imploding, and the fallout was just beginning. The storm I'd unleashed was gathering strength, and soon, it would hit Vicky with its full, devastating force. The phone rang, a jarring sound in the quiet of Eleanor's suburban home. It was Vicky. I'd been expecting it, of course. The news had hit her like a tidal wave, washing away the carefully constructed sandcastle of her life. Her perfect husband a fraud. Her dream future crumbling into dust. I let it ring a few times, just to let the silence stretch, to let her feel a sliver of the isolation she'd so readily inflicted on me. Finally I picked it up. "Hello." Vicky's voice, when it came, was a choked whisper, stripped of its usual haughty edge. Mom, you have to help me." The desperation was palpable, a raw, ugly thing that clawed at the edges of my carefully maintained composure. "Help you with what, Vicky?" I asked, my voice as cool and detached as I could make it. It was a practiced tone, one I'd honed over years of dealing with her manufactured crises. With all of this," she stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Robert. They're saying he's a criminal. My friends. They're not returning my calls. My life is. It's over. It's all falling apart." I listened, a strange mix of vindication and a dull ache in my chest. This was the storm I'd unleashed, and she was finally caught in its eye. "I'm sorry to hear that, Vicky," I said, the words feeling hollow even to me. "Sorry. Mom, this is because of you. If you hadn't made such a scene at the wedding, if you hadn't been so embarrassing, maybe none of this would have happened. The old accusation, the familiar deflection. It was so predictable, so." A humorless laugh escaped me. "You think this is about the wedding? You think my actions are the cause of Robert's alleged business practices?" I let the implication hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. "He's not a criminal. He's just had some bad luck. You're twisting things, Mom. You always do." Her voice cracked. "Please, Mom. We need to fix this. We need to go to the press, say it's all a misunderstanding. You can talk to Arthur, can't you? He's your lawyer, he'll listen to you." The audacity of it. After everything, after her public humiliation, her venomous words, she expected me to swoop in and clean up her mess. She expected me to use the very resources she'd scorned to protect her gilded cage. "Vicky," I said, my voice hardening, the last vestiges of softness draining away. "Arthur Finch works for me. And my interests are no longer aligned with yours. Or Robert's." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that screamed louder than any accusation. I could almost picture her, standing in her opulent, now-tainted mansion, the designer clothes suddenly feeling like a costume, the perfect life a cruel illusion. You won't help me," she finally whispered, the disbelief in her tone almost comical. You made your choices, Vicky. You chose your path. And you chose to walk it without me. I remembered the cold, hard glint in her eyes when she'd spoken those words at the country club. The dismissal. The rejection. But, Mom, I'm your daughter. What about family? The plea was desperate, a last-ditch effort to cling to the one thing she'd always taken for granted. Family, I repeated, the word tasting foreign, almost bitter. You had a very different definition of family when you stood there and threw me to the wolves. You chose your husband, your new life. You made your bed, Vicky. Now you have to lie in it. A sob escaped her. I can't do this alone, Mom. I'm scared. And in that moment, a flicker of the old maternal instinct stirred. A tiny, fragile ember in the ashes of my anger. But I quickly smothered it. It was too late. The damage was done, the lines irrevocably drawn. I'm sorry, Vicky, I said, the words devoid of any real warmth. But this is a bridge you burned yourself. I can't help you cross it. I heard a choked sob, then the click of the phone disconnecting. I held the receiver for a moment longer, the silence amplifying the hollowness in the room. The storm had indeed broken, and Vicky was finally facing the wreckage. It was a brutal truth, but it was the truth she needed to hear. And I, her mother, was the one who had to deliver it. The carefully orchestrated dismantling was almost complete. The silence after Vicky's call was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the tense stillness before a storm, but the eerie calm after the tempest has passed. I was back at my place on Maplewood Drive, the same comfortable house that now felt both too small and too large for me alone. The television was still on, a low hum of background noise, but my eyes weren't on the screen. They were fixed on the small, tarnished silver locket I held in my palm. It was a simple thing, a keepsake from a time before the sharp edges of betrayal had cut so deep. I'd spent the last few weeks in a kind of suspended animation, watching from the sidelines as the carefully laid dominoes I'd set in motion tumbled down. Arthur had been discreet, efficient. The news had broken like a tidal wave, not just in Metropolis but nationwide. Robert Sterling's empire, built on a foundation of lies and shady dealings, had crumbled spectacularly. Stock prices had tanked, investors had fled, and the whispers had turned into shouts. Indictments were being handed down, and the Sterling name was now synonymous with fraud. Vicky. I'd heard through Maggie that she was in a bad way. Her friends had vanished, her social standing had evaporated, and the life she'd so desperately clung to was dissolving before her eyes. The money was gone, or tied up in legal battles, leaving her stranded in a mansion that suddenly felt like a prison. She'd tried to reach me again, Maggie said, but I'd let it go to voicemail. There was nothing left to say. The damage was done, and it was irreparable. She had made her choices, and I had simply facilitated the consequences. I thought about David. He'd been so earnest, so genuinely kind. I hoped he'd managed to steer clear of the wreckage, that he hadn't been dragged down by Robert's downfall. He was an innocent caught in the crossfire, and that was a heavy burden to bear. I'd done what I could to plant a seed of doubt in his mind about Robert. Just a whisper, really. It was enough to make him question, to make him see Robert's true colors, perhaps. Maggie had called yesterday, her voice tinged with a mixture of awe and concern. Eleanor, it's all over the news. They're saying Sterling's company is finished. Completely. She'd paused, then added. And Vicky? Well, she's been seen out and about, but she looks lost, like a ghost. I hadn't responded, just listened. There was no satisfaction in this, not really. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck you'd deliberately set in motion. My revenge wasn't about inflicting pain for its own sake. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own dignity. It was about showing Vicky and Robert and everyone who had dismissed me that I was not a doormat. I was a force. The world had tried to break me, and in the process, it had forged me into something harder, something more resilient. I closed my hand around the silver locket, the metal cool against my skin. The carefully constructed facade of Vicky's perfect life had been shattered, and in its place, a stark, undeniable reality had emerged. Robert was facing prison time. Vicky was facing a future she'd never imagined, one stripped of the glamour and security she'd craved. They had built their world on a foundation of deceit, and it had all come crashing down. My own future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time it felt like mine. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of ruins, but also a strange, quiet peace. I had taken back control, not with anger, but with a cold, calculated precision. The illusion was gone. The truth, however brutal, had set me free. The life I had once known was over, replaced by something new, something I was still trying to understand. But it was mine. And that was enough. That's it. If you liked this video, share it with your friends and leave your like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comments saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that I guarantee you will like. Until the next video.